And thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been a pretty busy week and a half, to say the least, since our Board of Education approved the return to learning plan that was proposed by the county last Monday night. And we've been meeting quite a bit with principals and district officials in order to try to answer as many questions as we possibly can, but we totally understand and acknowledge that the number of questions outnumber the number of answers that we have right now. And so I just want to talk through a couple of points that I know I've shared over email as well as on social media, so that I can set the stage for this conversation tonight as best as possible. Up on your screen right now, you'll see the school start calendar is what I called it, that shows graphically for folks what the school year will look like. There were so many models that were proposed by different districts that I think that when the return to learn plan came out from the county, there were a ton of questions about, well, does my child attend Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday? And so this school start calendar is designed to just kind of put out there for folks like, we come back on the 25th of August and we're starting with 2 3-day weeks. That was the calendar that was planned 3 years ago. That's the calendar we have. But that actually works out well for us to think about a slower start to this school year, to help us all adjust and prepare for what that in-person learning looks like. Because I know the question will come up as we get deeper into virtual learning. The virtual learning calendar will mirror the in-person calendar. There won't be a difference between those two, other than one unique feature, and that is that we see in this calendar the existence of a new type of day that we're not necessarily accustomed to, called a remote learning day. And those are scheduled for the last 3 weeks there in September, as a way to help students and teachers and families transition back and forth between learning in classrooms and learning remotely. So David, if you want to go to the next slide, there are a couple of different graphics that we put out there along with this school start calendar that I want to elevate here for discussion, because I think that we're all having to learn new vocabulary, educators and parents alike, as we start to think about what this next school year will look like. And so this graphic just defines a remote learning day as a day that we're counting as a school day, but that students and teachers are not present in the traditional classroom. And this is remote learning is when learning occurs primarily through technology, but all of those in-person classroom relationships and structures are still relatively in place, right? So, and so when we see those 3 remote learning days on the calendar, those are days where we're expecting that students still do schoolwork and do their best in order to engage in the coursework that their teachers provide, but understand that they're going to be back the next day, so that way teachers can give students feedback, students can give teachers feedback on kind of how that went, so that we can improve and get better at providing that into the future. So that's a remote learning day. David, can you go to the next slide? So if you recall the first paragraph of that countywide plan, it said that in-person learning would be blended. And that word sometimes gets used to mean a couple of different things. And so we felt it was very important for us to define that within the context of the start of this school year, so that we all had a common understanding of what we meant at Bay City Public Schools when we say blended learning. When we say blended learning, we're referring to an approach to teaching that uses technology to enhance or improve in-classroom learning. So this would look like teachers providing basic agendas of what's happening in class, resources, homework, activities online, but lessons still being provided in person. And the purpose for this blended learning approach is twofold. One is that since one-to-one technology initiatives existed or first came about, some 20 years ago or more, blended learning is known to be an approach that benefits students, that if they happen to be absent, if they go out of town, that they can still stay engaged with the content for the course, And blended learning lends itself well to circumstances that like we're in currently, because if in the event that teachers or students have to spend any prolonged periods of time out of a classroom due to quarantine or remote learning days being scheduled by or required by the health department or the state, that we're prepared for it, right? That if we're already prepared for this mix of in-person and online learning, then we'll be better prepared for those circumstances as they occur. So this is different though than what we're here to talk about today. David, if you can go to the next slide, which is virtual learning. And I think this is where it can start to get murky in our minds, because I'll see sometimes in the way that people ask questions, totally understandably, they'll interchange remote with virtual, virtual with remote, hybrid. We'll talk about here in a second, and then blended. And so totally understandable. And so the more we can look at and read these definitions and try to form that common understanding of what these terms mean, the better we'll be able to communicate as we move forward through the year. But virtual education, virtual learning is a method of learning where the delivery of content and lessons is 100% online. There may be in-person components to it for support or workshops where the learning gets hard, but the primary delivery method for all lessons is over the internet. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. Bay City Public Schools has offered virtual high school for the last year, and has had plans to expand that to the middle school and the elementary school. And obviously the current situation we find ourselves in, knowing that we're going to have more families that are going to want the type of flexibility of time and space for their kids, makes this a certainly a higher demand option for the school district moving forward. But when we say virtual learning, we're talking about a specific program where all learning is intentionally planned to occur online. And that's different than remote learning, different than blended learning, which are more associated with that in-person learning component. So the next slide here, David. To make things a little bit more complicated, we've been talking about this idea of hybrid as being that third option. And then in my most recent communication, you'll see that just in order to simplify it in all of our minds, we've only been talking about two options: in-person and hybrid. I'm sorry, in-person and virtual. But please know that that doesn't take a hybrid schedule off the table. But when we think about hybrid schedules, we think about it from within the context of virtual, right? And so how does a child access a hybrid schedule? By becoming a virtual student. And so what is hybrid? When I say that, I mean a student who's taking majority virtual coursework or online coursework with some scheduled in-person classes. The most classic examples at the secondary level are we receive a lot of questions about kids that parents who are thinking about putting their kids in virtual, but they really still want to take band, or they really want their child to participate in a particular elective, or their child is in the first year of a foreign language and needs to finish that up. And boy, online foreign language doesn't necessarily sound appealing online. Like, those are all the sorts of circumstances. Oh, or at the high school level, especially, we've gotten a lot of questions about students who go to the Career Center or students that dual enroll. Those are all hybrid options that are on the table and available to students at the secondary level. And what they typically would look like is a student spending the majority of their day taking most of their courses online, with a subset of courses scheduled in-person classes. And so just again, when we go through the next couple of slides and we talk about what's going to be asked of parents, please just know that the two main choices that are on the table are: do you want your child to participate in in-person learning, given the safety protocols that we'll be talking more about later on this week? or do you want your child to be in virtual education? Um, and once you make that choice of virtual education, it's then that you'll be contacted by David and his team about the possible hybrid schedules that you could go into. So in the short term, the decision is just virtual or in person. Down the road, hybrid schedules we consider it an integral part of a virtual student schedule. Just want to point out, in case you haven't seen it, I think it was last night we released an FAQ document where we started compiling all of the questions that were coming in through email and social media, and we'll use your questions that you're asking using the Q&A tool here in Zoom tonight to continue to add to that. If you have not seen that yet, I've created a shortened address here at bit.ly/BCPS-fall-FAQ. So that is out there on the internet and linked on social media and our website. The biggest news to share with you is that we are pushing all families to complete an online registration for the first time this year. We would like all families to log into Skyward to complete a relatively quick online registration process to test it out for our Office of Student Services tonight. I registered one of my kids, and it's pretty straightforward. A lot of next buttons and checking information. Online registration is really an opportunity for us to check that all the information that we have on file for you and your child is accurate, that give you an opportunity to update any contact information without an exchange of forms or paperwork. I think now more than ever, making sure that we have accurate contact information is crucial. It's also an opportunity for us to take care of some of the paper shuffling of signing off on handbooks, acceptable use policies for the internet and whatnot at school, and probably most notably, given the time that we're in, it's an opportunity for us to ask parents to select which of those options I mentioned they choose for their children this year. So there's a single page as part of registration where you're asked to say, yes or no, do you want full-time in-person learning for your child, or do you want full-time online virtual education for your child? And those are the two basic options. And once you fill that out, if you say that you would like your child to be a part of the virtual education program at Bay City Public Schools by saying so on that registration form, then David and his team will reach out to you with next steps and take care of all the paperwork and back end stuff in order to make your child a virtual student. And so that's really it. The registration opens tomorrow. Our principals will be sending out the communication of that, and the window is open for registration until the 12th. We are asking for all families to register by August 12th.
All right, so this part was not actually part of the webinar. I had to re-record the next several slides just to make up for a mistake that we had on our recording. The recording did not start until later in the webinar. So the part you just watched was from Mr. Malley talking about the return to learn plan, and that was during our secondary webinar that we were able to do. So I'm going to kind of walk through the next parts of our slides, just kind of going off memory and kind of talking through. So it is not the exact same, but I hope that the content remains the same. So we're going to talk about what virtual education looks like here at an elementary level. The first thing I want to always bring up is the idea that all of our students will be supported by Bay City Public Schools teachers. We think that that's really an important part of our program, and that we are getting Bay City Public Schools teachers. They have applied to be elementary teachers, and we have been able to hire a few so far, and the rest will be dependent on how many students we get enrolled. But these are teachers that wanted to be part of the virtual program. So one of our first teachers is Nicole Brensky. She's a teacher, former teacher from McGregor. She's been with Bay City for several years, and we're excited to have her aboard. One of our next teachers is Tara Milks. She's going to be an upper elementary teacher for us. She's a former teacher at Handy Middle School. We're excited to have her. She brings a Project Lead the Way background actually, and what Project Lead the Way is it's an engineering program. Typically at we use it at our middle school levels. So it's not something that we'll be doing right away in virtual, but I'm excited to have that potential going forward to have the engineering type classes at our virtual school. And our last currently hired teacher for elementary is our K-12 PE and health teacher. So Mr. Phelps is our PE and health teacher. He's been a 13-year health and PE teacher, as well as spending a few years in administration, and we're happy to have him aboard. So when we talk about our Bay City Public Schools teachers, we talk about how we can have this, what we're going to call a school-to-home partnership. This is a slide that we've used in a few presentations so far, but I think it's a really important thing for us to talk about, in that we're really looking to have a partnership between our teachers, our school, and our parents. Because we think in a virtual environment, it's really important to talk about how the parent controls that at-home learning environment. And you already play a huge role in your child's education, but the role becomes magnified when they're learning at home. And with that role being magnified, you also have the opportunity to really instill your own personal values, family values, and values of education when you're able to work with your child at home. So that we just think that's an important partnership for us to talk about. So what does the student experience look like? So what I'm going to do is hop on to the platform that we'll be using. We're going to be using Lincoln Learning Solutions as our main platform, and I'm going to hop onto the page here, and we will take a look at Lincoln Learning Solutions. All right, so we're going to take a look at a second grade math lesson with our platform. There's a few things that I'm going to point out to you. So this is similar to what it would look like for the student. It's not the exact same, only because we're looking at a demo, but it's very close to what the lesson would look like as a student. So the first thing that I want to show you is the progression of how the lessons work. So right now we're at a lesson 36 in second grade math. So one of the really key things that we like about Lincoln Learning Solutions is that it's very predictable for our students. So they go through this progression of what they're called ITs. So you can see here we have a teach it, a read it, a watch it, a play it, and then a show it. And this here is the show it answer key. So if I click on my first part, which is the teach it, this is the teach it lesson for repeated addition with objects. So this is the idea. So you can read it here. Please click the play button to watch a video version of the read it. So if you remember, I said teach it and read it. So this is a video version of the read it. You can have that read it alongside that. I'll show you in a second. But I'm just going to kind of click on this video here. So
repeated addition with objects. Hi there. Today you will represent repeated addition problems. For today's lesson, you will need some counters. A football game has 4 quarters. The Vikings made 7 points in each of the 4 quarters. How many points did the team have at the end of the game? Laying out your counters and adding each group.
So I won't show the whole video because I think you'll get a good sense of what the video covered here in a second. But you can see they're very short videos, 3 minutes and 20 seconds. And they're all about that same kind of time frame. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next activity, which is the read it version of what we just looked at. So this would be something that, number one, we would think about our teachers working through with students as well, in kind of working through as a lesson, but also you having the ability to do this together, and you using it as coming back for supplement. So just from the video, this is the same kind of question she had. So laying out your counters and adding each group will help you solve this problem. So if a student was watching that video by themselves, they could have this open on a screen, or it could have been printed off, so they could be looking at it as the video is going through and kind of counting through and working on it as they go. And then you see a check for understanding here at the end. So they would look at how many rows would you need, or how many rows should you make in an array for this problem. So they would talk about how many rows do we need to make that, and I'm going to go ahead and click on C for 4 rows, and I'm going to go ahead and submit it. And then it gives me some instant feedback for for what we have. Another thing I want to point out here is this here. So this is the toolbar. One of the nice things that I like about this is we talk a lot about how the parents are really important and how we need to spend a lot of time together. That you'll have to spend some time together with your child, but it also allows for some of our not fluent readers to be able to speak selections.
Repeated addition. Repeated addition
So you
with
kind of watch
objects.
how it's up here.
Objective. You will represent repeated addition problem. To solve the problem in the introduction, you will need to add 7 together 4 times.
So I think it's just a nice, it's just a nice added number one accessibility feature. Number two, for our younger readers, they can read along with the text. There are some other tools up here that the students would learn to use if they needed, like translation. If there is a bilingual family, there's a dictionary to find the definition of a word. Students are able to make sticky notes. So let's if you were working with your family and you wanted to create a sticky note, you'd be able to kind of create a sticky note that they could always come back to and see. And so there's some other nice features, and different ones will show up at different times throughout the lesson. So the next page here I'm going to go to is the next activity. So we go teach it, read it. Now we have a watch it. So this watch it in this particular lesson brings us out to Khan Academy. So if I were to click on here, it would open up a new window and open up Khan Academy with another video that the students would be able to watch. There's another reinforcement of the lesson, similar to what they'd be doing in a classroom, and having some supplemental teaching activities. And then after that, we have the play it. So teach it, read it, watch it, play it. So this is a game. I'm not going to play the game, but it's Beaker's Big Buzz Multiplication. So it's a game where they're going to be asked about multiplication problems, because we know that repeated addition is multiplication. And then finally, the last one is the show us. This is where where the student would actually be looking at showing showing that they have learned about repeated addition. And then as the parent, you would have access to this answer key that would, if you needed to show the student what that looks like, or sometimes as we're looking through this, you may not have seen the way that the lesson was presented, but you could certainly look at the answer key to have a good idea of what it was looking for. And then that would be the end of that particular lesson on repeated addition. And this is where our teachers would be thinking about what other supplemental activities that they should be looking at with students, thinking about what kind of videos and Zoom calls that could be had to supplement different lessons. And those will look different at different grade levels based on different needs and what students need at each grade level. So I'm going to come back to the slideshow here. I'm going to close this out and come back to the slideshow. We're just going to kind of go over a couple other things that we've already talked about in some of the presentations, but I think they're important to continue to bring up. So virtual really allows us to have this flexible environment. A lot of the questions have been, if my student does virtual and I'm working during the day, do I have to work with them right during the day, or are we able to work at different times? And the answer is that you work really on your own schedule. The idea that you can work anytime, you can work in any place, and you get to work at your own pace. And I think that's really important. But when you need it, you can also come into the building for support. So we have our student support centers that are going to be in at least 2 places throughout the district. And then teachers being available. But I think it's going to be important to be able to have that face-to-face contact with as available and as needed. So right now we're planning on staffing 2 elementary locations, so one at Washington Elementary and one at McAleer-Sodden. All right, so some of the other questions that we've gotten are, what does a tentative day look like for a virtual elementary student? So we look at how much time are they going to be spending on different activities, what are they going to be doing. So we kind of put together this idea of about how much time they'll be spending on different subjects and activities, and these are very similar to what they would be spending in the classroom. The time with content is important, So if you were to add these up, it comes to about 3 to 5 hours a day of different activities. And as a parent, depending on your student and depending on their abilities, especially the younger students, you're going to have to find, you're going to have to try and work on how you can have someone available with your student to help them through a lot of this. It's not like you would have to spend 3 to 5 hours right next to them, but you're probably going to have to be available as needed for your upper elementary students and your lower students. It's just gonna be something that we have to find time, and that's one of the things that my wife and I are working on is when are we going to find time to to help our kindergarten students if we choose virtual, which we're having the same internal debate that so many families are about whether to send our student back to Washington Elementary or to send him to keep him home and do virtual. And that's that is one of those internal debates that we're having, that we know so many families are having. But just thinking about how this is the amount of time that students are going to have of content, and when are we as a family going to commit that time to be able to help guide him through this. So attendance is another question that we get is when are students required to attend, and what if they're absent and things like that. So with virtual, we know that attendance looks very different than an in-person attendance. There's not attendance does not logging on at 7 a.m. and staying online till 4 p.m. That's not how attendance works. Attendance is tracked through a combination of two different things. So the first one is this two-way communication. So it's a weekly back and forth response between student and teacher. And in elementary cases, student/parent and teacher. So that'll be the teacher sending out an update to students, and the students being, the student and parents responding back with questions and staying on task with with questions and feedback and things like that. Or two-way communication would be coming into a drop-in center and working with the teacher. That would be a two-way communication. The other way that attendance would be tracked is through course progression. So is the student actually participating in completing the course? Are they on track to complete the course on time? So what if your student starts falling behind, and this is a new environment? So what happens if the student is starting to struggle, or there's barriers? There's barriers that are maybe making it more difficult or hard to keep up. So we're going to follow a systematic support process. And the last webinar, I kind of went through some of the positions that we were hiring, and one of those positions that we're hiring is a support coordinator. So the support coordinator is going to work with administration and teachers to help break down barriers for students. We think about behaviors, and behaviors look different virtually. So a behavior, quote unquote, issue in virtual would be more of like, is the student staying on task during the day? Like, are they able to participate? Is there maybe a schedule issue where we need to talk? We need to work with your student on, okay, how do we put together a good schedule to stay on task, and what incentives do we need to work on? Or are there access issues? Are there internet issues, technology issues? This support coordinator is going to help us kind of break down those barriers. But if the student's falling behind and at risk of not being successful, then we're going to have to think about some more intense or more consistent check-ins. So when a student's at risk of failing, so you think of a student being at risk of not completing the content and not being proficient. We call that below a 75%, and the 75% looks different in elementary. There's less percentage-based grading, but I think that the idea is similar. That if they are, if they're not being successful, we need to think about providing more support, as well as if a student is not completing the tasks. So in a 38-week school year, we would break it down by a semester, so 19 weeks. So we'd be thinking about a student needing to complete 6% of a semester every week. So if after 3 weeks, where you should have completed about 18% of a semester, if you're only at 9-10%, then we need to think about how do we, what structures and what supports do we need to help that student get caught up. and get on track and be successful. So that's when we would start thinking about having consistent check-ins with the teacher or the support coordinator, either virtually or in person, in either individually or small group. To make sure that student, these would be extra check-ins to make sure that they're staying on task and see how we can help to make sure your student can be successful. All right. So what is the hybrid model that I keep hearing about? And since I recorded this afterwards, since the original recording wasn't kept, you would have heard earlier where Mr. Malley was talking about the hybrid model in his introduction. So in elementary, we're looking at a hybrid model of doing your core classes virtually, but having an in-person option for the elective classes. And the idea of this is to provide that socialization that is so critical during elementary school, and allow for some different types of activities to where students can get that socialization and still get their core classes virtually. So right now, until we have an idea of exactly how many students are interested in this hybrid model and what grades they're in, right now we've only, we can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like. I can tell you that right now we've secured at least 2 sections of a hybrid that would be like a STEAM media combination once a week, and then a STEAM PE combination once a week for different grade levels. And as enrollment increases, then we'll be able to be more specific about what those look like. But we just need to have an idea of how many people are interested in it. And then we'll communicate times and places for those. So the big thing to think about would be that you would have to be able to get your student there on a consistent basis, and have them, have the students there, and then be able to pick them up, because it would not be a full day, and it most likely would not butt up to the front or the where they could take a bus and then be picked up. The likelihood of that is slim. So these would be something that would be a commitment to the family to make sure that they are bringing them to the school for the hybrid model. All right. So the some of the other common questions we get are what if my student is maybe non-traditional? So maybe I have maybe my son or daughter is gifted and talented, or maybe I have honors in here. That's not an elementary program. Or maybe they're special ed, or they require some type of accommodation from traditional learning that to help them be more successful, or maybe they're more accelerated. So the beauty in, and I've talked about it a few times, the great thing about virtual is that it's personalized education. So we have the ability to to personalize content, personalize pacing, personalize things for your students. So if your student is gifted and talented, we will be able to adapt the coursework to suit their advanced content needs. So if they're a third grade gifted and talented student, they're probably past most third grade content. So we would look at what level of content does your child need, and we will adapt those adapt the coursework to suit that. But we need to kind of keep the reminder that the virtual is not a gifted and talent is not a virtual program. It is a brick and mortar program, and the actual gifted and talented program will be housed at brick and mortar buildings, not in virtual. But we will absolutely find a way to challenge your child to make sure that they're ready. And then when you decide that you want to go back to brick and mortar, they will be in good shape to continue the learning with their class. So then the special education and 504 plan students. If your child has an IEP or a 504 plan, we're going to have to meet early in the school year to determine any modifications needed for this plan to be successful virtually. So we would get together early and look at it and decide, okay, what supports might that child need. In some cases, virtual is an accommodation depending on the student. Do they need to have certain? Do we need to look at having certain special education supports, whether it's an in-person at a support center or it's a Zoom call. We will each student is an individual. So we would have to adapt and modify as we see fit. And I think Shelly, I think you are up next.
All righty, thank you. So we really have spent the last couple of webinars and even in our time today, really sharing with you the school side considerations of what virtual will look like, how will it be different than what we experienced in the spring. And so we want to be really clear that while there are all of these school level or school side considerations and plans being made, we want to be really clear, as David mentioned, that there are some pretty heavy expectations from families in choosing a virtual school opportunity for their children. We really believe that the platforms we have chosen are engaging. We know that the commitment of using our own teachers to support this learning will offer a rigorous opportunity for students. But we really would be remiss if we didn't share with you the importance of that parental support that's needed from home so that virtual students are successful. So remember, or thinking back to the spring, we did our best to provide lessons that were review or were lessons that really could be completed for the most part on a easy or independent level for most students. And that was really because we had no idea of knowing what every family situation was or what support students had. And so what was offered in the spring was very different. The purpose of this program is very different from that, and it's going to require some heavy lifting from parents. And we want to be upfront with that and be very transparent about that. So when we're looking at those parent considerations or wanting to support parents in making this decision, there really are 4 considerations to be thinking about. And what I've noticed as a mom, if I take these considerations and I apply them to my own children, they have very different needs. And so it might not be a one-size-fits-all decision for a family. It's really depending on each child. But you definitely want to be thinking about the academic needs of your children. Typically in a virtual school, students don't struggle with the academic content because, as Mr. Farley mentioned, virtual lessons can be personalized. So whether your student is struggling, whether your student is advanced, it's really easy for us to meet your child where they're at. But really what you want to look at is more along the lines of whether your child is intrinsically motivated, right? Does your child have some time management skills already as a strength of theirs, or are you needing to constantly redirect and remind them to get tasks completed? Does your child love technology, and are they kind of tech savvy and not afraid to learn or use new technology? Here's a key consideration. Do your children accept you or accept you as a parent, also as a teacher? And I think about my youngest when I think about this. He's a senior coming this fall. But I'll tell you that remote learning opportunity we had in the spring was a bit of a challenge because I now was teacher and parent role. And so there was a struggle at times of he would have preferred to learn from a teacher, not from me. And in a virtual setting, the parent is often the first teacher, right? You're going to be the first line of defense in most cases. So also think about the emotional needs of your children. Do they really thrive on social interaction? And if they really need that social interaction, a virtual setting may or may not be the best choice. let's say your child is really social, and you also have them engaged or enrolled in quite a few opportunities, whether it's athletics or clubs, then they may be fine. But if you're not able to commit to that face-to-face environment, might support those social needs that they have. Again, do they resist or embrace the parental guidance regarding academics? And this one is aligned with, it's almost the opposite of what I just said about the social interaction, and you know your children better than anybody, so you really it's just something to think about. If your child has some pre-existing sort of depression or isolation tendencies, often parents think virtual is the best choice for those kids. And for some it may be, and for others it may not be. For others, those that tend to draw back, the virtual setting in some cases exasperates that, and children become more isolated. So you just want to think about your child and make sure you're watching for those things. Also, you want to consider those the physical needs. A lot of times we take these for granted, but in a virtual setting, it can be really easy for half your day to go by and you realize, oh my gosh, I didn't even get up to go get a drink of water. Or, oh, I have this headache, and it might not be because I'm staring at my screen all day. It's because I haven't had anything. I've had no water to drink. I've been working all day. So making sure that your family has a commitment to being physically active or can rely on routines and schedules of making sure they're up and about and moving around. And then of course there's some of those environmental needs that we need to be thinking about. Do you have a place in your home that you can set up as a defined learning space that's free of distraction? And this does have an impact on student learning. There is a very different feel between a child that gets up and grabs a Chromebook and goes and sits on the couch and watches TV, or a student that has an alarm clock that's set for 9:30 because that's when he's chosen to start school, and he goes to his set space that's designed particularly to support learning. We mentioned those student support centers, and of course you want to consider whether or not you have the ability to transport your child or have somebody get your child to a support center if needed. And then of course, you know, I know you're all thinking about this. This is probably stating the obvious, but what type of supervision will you have for your child? You know, should you get called back to work, or should you already be working? Do you have a college student or a relative that can support and supervise their learning while you're not there to do that for them? So just some of those parental considerations. We've all, Patrick, David, and I have been having a lot of conversations with individual families. We're happy to continue to do that with you, but these are our 4 common areas that we're talking about quite frequently. And you know, just remember, at the end of the day, we all want our students to be successful. We want them to grow and learn and flourish, regardless if you choose face-to-face or virtual. So, but we just want you to know we're here to support you in making that decision.
Thank you all for your time. David, any closing remarks from you before we say goodbye?
No, I'd want to just thank everybody. I know we are probably, there's several questions kind of still in that Q&A. We probably don't have time before our secondary to answer those, but that's I guess that's the beauty of the frequently asked questions document that we have, is that we can be putting in the answers to many of those questions into that document. Because there are, as I'm going through it, there are some really great questions that we didn't necessarily get to the answer of some of these. There's some very individual type questions that we could answer more broadly to help our families. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining us. And if you need us, if you need help from us, so feel free to reach out. or send me an email. I've probably emailed many of you from the webinar, so you've all got my email, and I will do my best to answer those quickly. I can't guarantee right now. I can't guarantee a 24-hour turnaround, but I will answer them as quick as I can to get there. So thank you very much.
David, I just wanted to mention to you in front of all of the parents that are on the line that when we save these recordings, all of the questions that you ask are saved in a text file that I can give to David that he can incorporate in future communications. And so we answered 45 questions while you were talking by typing to parents that they were able to see in that Q&A module on here. I realize we didn't get to all of them, but we'll continue to add to those. And I would assume this is our last scheduled webinar for the summer, but I would certainly assume that we're likely to make contact here again in the next coming weeks as the questions start to pile up. So thanks again for your time, and have a great night.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.